made a solution for Vietnamese farmers to import dragon fruit to Australia using blockchain to authenticate that the fruit have been sprayed and has no insects on them, and it can come into Australia safely. But when we meet someone who works in a different department and they say, well, that's just one department, one government department, and we are continuing our work. So we're close to like 20% of all the ICO revenue went to Lithuania for last year.
How you said with the guys that are looking at the fruit from Vietnam, that the government have embraced that and have worked with them in terms of at least exploring the technology at the ground level to see if there's something here.
Finance minister is like 30 years old, so he's really into blockchain technology. And
welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole, your easy to understand podcast on the blockchain and beyond. My name is Tim Lee, and thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the ever-evolving and sometimes elusive world of the blockchain. In this episode, we'll be exploring how governments are reacting to the blockchain. The episode will be in two parts. In part one, we'll be talking to Paul Gutauskas, who runs the Canberra Blockchain Centre. For those of you outside of Australia, Canberra is the administrative capital of Australia, where most of the federal government resides. Given Paul's background is from Lithuania, he is also ideally positioned to compare the two countries' governmental approaches to using the blockchain. In part two of this episode, I will be talking to Katrina Donaghy, co-CEO of Civic Ledger, a blockchain startup that is focusing on blockchain applications within government. We talk with Katrina about their water ledger project, which looks at bringing transparency to the $16 billion market for water rights here in Australia. This project has meant working with different state governments. So, are governments adopting blockchain technology quickly and effectively? Let's find out as we head down the rabbit hole.
Nothing in the Down the Rabbit Hole podcast should be considered as investment or legal advice. The blockchain and cryptocurrency markets globally are unregulated, high risk, and constantly changing. You're advised to seek professional guidance before contemplating any opportunities within the blockchain and cryptocurrency space.
Thank you for joining us again on Down the Rabbit Hole. Really delighted to have a guest who's actively involved in the government space. For those of you who are outside of Australia, I'm going to be interviewing Paul Gutauskas today from the Canberra Blockchain Centre. And Canberra is the administrative capital of Australia, where all the government officials are. And it's very much, I've met Paul around the traps, and it's just going to be very interesting to hear what's happening in the blockchain space and government. So just like to welcome Paul. Thank you for sparing the time to talk to us today, Paul. Really appreciate it.
no, thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. Anyway.
Maybe what it might be good, Paul, if you just give us a quick idea, just for the audience members, just give us a quick idea of who you are and where you fit into the whole sort of blockchain ecosystem, if you like.
I started with a few other people around Canberra. We started the Canberra Blockchain Centre. It was about 6 months ago. We are working towards having our own space. We're working out of an innovation network in the city centre, which is a co-working space and an incubator, and we have accelerator programs, but we're trying to connect all the blockchain projects in Canberra and move everyone into a space where we can create something more interesting as an ecosystem. And yeah, so we started about 6 months ago. We've been in touch with a few government departments, and we try to not sell, but maybe educate the government officials or just the government staff as well, the technology.
Right, excellent. And I mean, how's that gone? What's been the response from the government in terms of, are they open to the idea of the blockchain, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I'd say they definitely are. And just from having a few events, we had an breakfast event a few weeks ago. It was 150 people there, quite a few government representatives. So, people working in government departments. But at the same time, the government was more active in May, maybe April, we had a lot more interactions with different departments. I guess after the Digital Transformation Agency's report, it maybe dwindled down a bit, I would say. But from other sources, from actually people who are working there, not the top of the departments, but we hear that there's projects are happening in pretty much every department. There's people trying to explore blockchain and possibilities. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, given you're in Canberra, which is the administrative capital of Australia, and you've got a lot of blockchain startups that you're working with, what sort of startups do you have in your incubator?
So there's all sorts. So I actually have met about 11, 12 projects in Canberra who are working, and some of them are startups, some of them are companies which are trying to do a more, as they say, serious work. So they're not fundraising, they're actually building apps or building platforms and such. But we have a few interesting ones at the protocol level. We have a crypto exchange. We have obviously, as everyone has to have a supply chain solutions, and yeah. So I think it's the same like all around the world. It's across the spectrum.
Okay, and are they most of those trying to deal with government then because of the location? Is that where most of the startups are focusing their efforts?
No, actually not. But they're dealing with the government in the sense that they're in touch with the government, government departments, not departments, but maybe they're going to trade missions with the government to Vietnam, to Singapore and stuff and such. So
Right.
They're joining other businesses as blockchain startups to go and sell their product. But as for building for the government, not really. They're not in that space. I guess everyone's trying to make money out of it in a private way. And there's a few, obviously, supply chain solutions which were funded by Ep6, and they are trying to make good in the world, so supply solutions for SMEs in the third world countries. So
you said Adva. What was the Adva in terms? That's just to put some perspective in it. I mean, it's an organization that looks at developing countries. Is that right?
Yes. So organizations which basically try and help small and medium enterprises in the third world countries, and instead of giving them money, they try and supply the solutions to make their businesses more effective, I guess.
Is this a charity-based idea, or is this a government-based agency? I mean, just from in holistic terms.
Yeah, no, it's a government-based agency, and
So what sort of things? I mean, you're saying that some of the startups in the Canberra Blockchain Centre have gone on these trade missions to third world countries, linked into the government body that supports third world countries. So are there particular types of ideas that have come out that the Australian government is keen to try and help the SMEs in third world countries? What sort of ideas are those?
It's mainly, from what I hear, so they're trying to do an e-commerce. So they're trying to, I guess, not promote, but maybe make banking easier, or currency solutions that
right.
They're still in progress, so it is still being developed. I haven't heard of actual project. There's people working on it, but they're still trying to work out if we can use blockchain solution for that. Obviously, there's a definite use case there, but the procurement and supply chains. So there's a Trade, a company which was made a solution for Vietnamese farmers to import dragon fruit to Australia, while authenticating that they're using blockchain to authenticate that the fruit have been sprayed and has no insects on them, and it can come into Australia safely, because Australia is a very protective country.
No, that's a really interesting case, isn't it? Because every time I travel back into Australia, and as soon as anybody comes to Australia, we've got a dedicated line that we have to go through for
declare something.
Yeah, to declare biological assets, I guess, in some sort of biological. I don't know how you define it. And it's a big problem. That I mean, not so much in terms of a big problem. I mean, it's a big issue of getting contaminated fruit. So I can see that really reflects well on the government trying to consistently try to help that narrative in terms of trying to keep out all the pests, the pests and the difficult sort of bugs, I guess, because Australia has such a good reputation for clean food, it would potentially decimate our reputation if they didn't do that. So I guess the question that, and you may not know this company well enough, but it's always one of those things. Garbage in, garbage out is the age-old thing of any database, and also with blockchain.
Yeah.
So if there are plants and fruit that have been sprayed so that it means that the bugs aren't on there, how do you validate that on the blockchain? I mean that's, I'm just curious.
I think the way they do it, they're just putting hashes into the blockchain, so they're validating after each action. So I guess when the fruits were sprayed, that goes onto as a validation that yes, this box of fruit has been sprayed. Someone presses a button. That's the way I imagine it, and then it gets put on a container. That container is put onto blockchain that the whole container is hashed into the blockchain. That is basically the container is safe.
Yes.
And when it gets to Australia, you can trace it back up to the farmer, who obviously it's the hardest thing, I guess, and it's always going to be the trust between the company and the farmer, because obviously it still comes down to that true information. So if the information is good and you can trust the farmer that he's going to do the right thing, then you can obviously spray at the moment, because we don't have IoT devices. So the idea is in the future to have our IoT devices doing it all automatically. So as soon as something's been sprayed, it goes onto blockchain. So they're still working on it. Their product is live, so there's a website, and they're traveling around the country and the world and trying to make it possible for not just dragon fruit, but for all other products as well. But the future, they're looking into having IoT devices doing it, so you don't have to trust anyone. So I would say, if you have something spraying pesticide or whatever they spray the fruit with, and have a camera in there, it can go straight away into the blockchain. I guess it can be done with AI and blockchain solution.
That sounds really interesting. I mean, what's the name of the company? Because that sounds like quite a groundbreaking type of idea. And I love this idea of it linking into the Australian government. I mean, you said on their website, what's the name of that company? I'm definitely going to check them out.
Yeah, EtherTrade. So
EtherTrade, as in Ethereum trade, but
just an I. Yeah.
Okay, EtherTrade.
Okay. ETHI trade, but you can put it on the link. I'll send you the links and.
Fantastic. I'll put it in the show notes for people to go and look at, because that's a really interesting sort of use case, because it helps both parties. It helps the Vietnamese ensure that their product is the one that's coming to Australia, and it also means the government has, I guess, a confirmation that the fruit is being protected. So what stage is that at? I mean, because obviously the government have embraced that. Are they running pilots, or are they testing it? What stage are they at?
They're not testing it. They first. It's in action. The first shipment of fruit already reached Australia a few months ago, I think. So they are doing it. The thing they're trying to work out at the moment is how to make a business out of it, how to make it viable, because they got a grant from the government.
Yes.
Obviously for small SME, empowering small SMEs. But at the moment it's how do we make a viable business out of this? But I don't know. Government spends $5 billion in supporting third world countries, and obviously they could do more, but that could be one of the use cases for them to make sure that safe produce come to Australia. And it doesn't even have to be a business case if they could just support this business through their own channels, I guess.
Yeah. I think it does show that the blockchain is being seriously considered, especially if there's grant funding that's actually been made available. That shows that the government are embracing it. I mean, so how does that? I mean, because there was the recent report that came out, the digital transformation report, as you referenced earlier, where they said the blockchain was at such a hype level that the recommendation was essentially almost to wait and see. I mean, have you had any feedback from within the community, within Canberra, as to the report, or from people from within government, or is it sort of business as usual? I mean, what's your take on it?
Sure. So, I was a bit shocked when it came out, because it came out from Digital Transformation Agency, and the way they said it was basically there is they can't see any viable use case at the moment. there's no point. There's if you want to use blockchain, there's other solutions which are better out there. But when we meet someone who works in a different department and they say, well, that's just one department, one government department, and we are continuing our work, what we do. So I don't think it's going to affect the broader government as it is, especially after government signed the contract with IBM for $1 billion for the next 5 years to implement blockchain and AI solutions into government departments or government business. So I don't think one report, I don't know even how big the report was, because it wasn't like it didn't affect anyone else except that department who was given, which you'd think digital transformation agencies should actually exploit the right way. We had a meeting with so digital transformation agency got $750,000 to explore blockchains a few months ago, to explore the blockchain and how it could be used, and they were really interested. They were really open. They had a good expert, not in house, but we spoke to when we had a meeting, and he knew what he was talking about. So yes, they had probably employed some people who knew what they're talking about. At the same time, I don't know if data analytics and like the experts who are building the solutions, they are good, but at the same time, you might need some visionaries who will make it happen as well. Because without a vision, obviously, it seems like there is better solutions, but if you don't explore the right places, if you don't look at the right places, you're not going to find it. If you're just going to look at the IBM technology and then try and implement that, and you'll see, think that doesn't work. There's a whole world out there. So yeah, you need visionaries, I think, in the government departments to make it happen. And obviously there's some. Yeah.
I mean, it would be very easy for us both to sit remotely from government and be critical, because that's the easiest thing for us all to do. And I guess it's about sort of cross-questioning. I mean, I was talking with a buddy of mine yesterday, and he was sort of saying, for example, that just via his laptop, he can actually enable 100,000 transactions a second to happen by a centralized server, for example, or just by one computer. Yeah. And it then does sort of bring into question a lot of the promise of blockchain. There's a lot of really good stuff, and I'm a total believer in it, but it's when you've got that decentralized structure, even if it's on a permissioned private blockchain, that there's always going to be a latency. There's always going to be a lag between confirming the data. And I mean, I guess when one looks at the Gartner hype cycle, Gartner, who are a research company, they talk about the hype cycle, so that the tail end of last year, we're right at the peak of the hype and we're coming into the valley of disillusionment. And I think that's very much being seen where companies are addressing the blockchain and saying, where is the return on investment? And I think, from that point of view, if you look at it in traditional terms, ROI is not there right now. And that's why it was really interesting how you said with the guys that are looking at the fruit from Vietnam, that the government have embraced that and have worked with them in terms of at least exploring the technology at the ground level to see if there's something here. And I think, as you say, I think if within individual government departments, perhaps if there are those visionaries, as you're saying, then we might see more implementation, which would be good. I mean, is that a fair sort of picture of where we are with the government, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we are, is that there are individuals, and maybe individuals in the departments more pushing for some solutions than the departments by themselves. And I think those individuals should be empowered to maybe explore, because obviously if the government wants to just leave it, let's say, 5 years and then see how it goes, so they'll come back and then try and catch up, well, I don't know, we might end up with the same problem where the government is catching up and the whole world has already moved on and implemented solutions, made regulations, and they're working with it. At the same time, again, it's hard, as you say, we're not in the government, we don't know what actually is happening there. Because when you look at the state government, so New South Wales is trialing driver's license on blockchain, so putting people's driver's licenses on blockchain, so you wouldn't have to print them anymore, and would be just on your phone or so. And so you have individual states which are moving forward. There's some departments which are moving forward, and so yeah, I think it's a whole mix. There's definitely a hype cycle, but that hype cycle, even if it reached the peak, I think it did, now it's at the actual implementation level where people are just working with technology. Whoever thinks that it's useful, they will just do it, because there are use cases, and like with supply chain, everyone I meet, Canberra business chambers or anyone else in business, they say one of the first use cases, they say it's supply chain as for supply chain solution is perfect. It's really good. So when you don't need the not mass adoption in a sense, but you don't need the speed of transactions, when you don't need to be super fast, it's still probably the safest solution. So like digital identity is still a great solution for blockchain. At the same time, it might be a bit scary depending on who takes control of it. But yeah, it's still pretty much the safest solution, as in from a hacking perspective, instead of having everything in one database, having it spread out. Obviously, it depends how the government looks at it and how they're going to do it. Businesses, startups, from that perspective, they're growing. There's more and more startups in Australia who are doing things on blockchain, and not only in Australia, obviously around the world. And it's not just because of the hype; it's because they see the use case.
There's some use cases there. I mean, you brought up a very valid point about other governments, for example. Perhaps being willing to embrace the early stage tech in a better way. I mean, I know, Estonia's been at the front of this. Dubai, certainly. I was speaking at a conference in Dubai last year, and they're committed by 2021 to getting all their government processes on the blockchain. And they're working with IBM and Consensus over there. You've got Singapore, you've got Malta, you've got a number of different...
Japan as well,
Yeah, absolutely. So there are different governments, different governments around the world who are embracing this technology faster. And I think in some ways it's one of those things. If you're an early adopting country, almost like sort of the tech startup land, the early adopters are the ones you want to actually to watch. And I guess early adopting governments are going to pave the way for others to say, okay, it's now been proven, it's less risky, therefore we can actually go in. Almost like, the banks you hear the banks always talking about being a fast follower rather than necessarily an innovator. And I think we're probably going to see that throughout the governments. Because when we first met, you sort of mentioned that you were originally from Lithuania. I mean, how are Lithuania approaching this? I mean, I must confess, I know almost nothing about Lithuania other than I've met you as a Lithuanian. So please forgive me if that's a really dumb question. But
no, it's a great question.
Are Lithuania approaching this?
Lithuania is definitely at the forefront. So like, there's two sides of it. So I think Lithuania got really well out of the hype, out of the ICO hype last year, because I think we got somewhere close to like 20% of all the ICO revenue went to Lithuania for last year. So
is
we
that
have
right?
really
20%?
Yeah, so it's crazy, and some of that revenue obviously never got recovered because it's still Lithuania. But Lithuania has the fastest internet in the world, so they are embracing any high-tech technologies. The finance minister, so the first blockchain center, as in global blockchain center, who is connected to Melbourne Blockchain Center, opened in Vilnius in February. I went there in March, and I spoke to the guys there because I live in Australia the last 6 years, so I am a bit disconnected. But when I went there in March and I spoke to them, and they said yes, that the central bank is embracing it. Finance minister is like 30 years old, so he's really into blockchain technology and is trying to push for it as much as possible.
A finance minister at 30 years old. Wow.
Yes.
That probably summarizes a key issue, I think. I mean, within a lot of government globally, and within major corporates, major enterprise, you have at the board level, you've got people well into their late 50s, 60s, whatever 60s, it might be, who maybe the first time they ever experienced a computer might have been in their 30s, Whereas if you've
Exactly.
got a chief finance minister of Lithuania that is 30 years young, I mean, that embraces, that obviously shows a desire to embrace new ideas and innovation. Okay, that's really interesting. So any other things that are coming out of Lithuania? Is this a place we really need to watch then?
Obviously, all the big companies, big guys, they set up their shops there. So Barclays, KPMG are there. Like all the biggest corporations are there now, and all the fintech startups are heading down to Lithuania because they made a very good environment for setting up. So taxes, they made some tax breaks. We have super fast internet, so we're not slowing down. Well, I think we're the first or second after Singapore or something like that. And everything, because the country is small enough, we can provide a lot of really smart people. So the Lithuania is at the forefront of laser technology and always has been. So they're first in the world. So like there's technology, physics, I think physics and fintech. That's definitely which comes out from Lithuania.
That's really interesting because, I mean, in the blockchain space, you hear of Estonia, you hear of Singapore, you hear of Dubai, as the major centers. But that's interesting that Lithuania equally are trying to sort of push their barrow and sort of say, look, come to us. And I mean, you said the fastest internet in the world. I mean, or in line with Singapore, as you were saying. But that's a major commitment from a governmental point of view. And I mean, I'm going to show my ignorance here, Paul. Please forgive me. All right.
Yeah.
Sure. Where the hell is Lithuania? I mean, I know it's part of the former URS or whatever, but I mean, I know Estonia is close to Finland. I have no idea. And this is my ignorance.
Yeah. So if you know Estonia, then just go down 800 kilometers towards Poland, and that's where Lithuania is.
So it's in between
Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They're the three Baltic states.
Right.
And we're bordering Poland and the Baltic Sea and Belarus. And I guess with that being a small country, we only have 3 million people. Everyone knows about Lithuania just because of basketball at the moment. So like if you follow Olympics, Lithuania is going to be there just a basketball team and a few others. But yes, I think after Estonia got hacked by Russia or by Russian hackers, they embraced the technology and they said we're going to be the safest and hackable place in the world.
Because
so
Estonia,
obviously
Estonia lost power or lost gas for 2 days or something as a result of that hack. Was that right?
Yeah. So something like that. And the government departments got hacked, and all the information got muddled up. So it was in the banks, central banks, I think. So it was quite a big hack. They made a super firewall that they said we're going to be the best, and we're going to do everything online just to show you that we are the best, so we can do it. So obviously, everyone's kind of hears about Estonia because they are really at the forefront there, and they are selling their technology to the rest of the world in Europe from that perspective of being the e-governments. So like paying your taxes, paying everything online, and it works. So I think that's, again, they started doing it before blockchain, and I don't know how much of the blockchain technology they embraced at the moment, or how much they're just doing because they already had the security pre-blockchain.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So I mean, given that you're now in Canberra, all right, and a different, a sort of I guess geographically a much bigger country, and I mean 25 million people versus 3 million, but I mean, and you're right in the heart of the administrative capital. I mean, security, regulation, compliance, all these sort of narratives have been coming through in the past 9 months, as we've seen as the cryptocurrency market has actually fallen. Are you sort of getting a sense of the conversations being around regulation and compliance in Canberra?
Well, I think because, I don't know, like the regulation is definitely not at the forefront for the politicians at the moment, because they have other things to think about, and that is really frustrating because I think if you don't have the regulation, you can't really move forward, because all you do is like find people for doing something, because like ICOs without knowing the rules, and then they create the rules, and then they try and find people or say that that's not what you should be doing. So like government is focusing on small local things the way I see it, and just infighting in between the parties instead of just taking the lead in something which could be great. There's no debate about it. There's no debate about automation and the digital identity, so how to make the government more efficient. At the same time, it probably is happening. It's just not at the regulation as we know about it. Like maybe because obviously ASIC has their own regulation, so that's coming through, and you have the set of rules which you can go by if you're doing an ICO. So if you have if you implementing distributed ledger technology, so DLTs. So there's definitely on this department level, people are doing stuff. You don't hear about it until you come across it. If you're doing an ICO or if you're trying to create a security token or something like that. But in a broader debate, it doesn't come out at the moment. People think it's still blockchain is Bitcoin, Bitcoin is for drugs, and that's the kind of the narrative you still hear, even though not as much now because no one's investing, no one's losing money. But as a technology, in that sense, it's not being regulated from the top. It's being done from the bottom up, I guess.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, just getting that perspective from the Administrative Capital of Australia is really interesting. The things that you've said, that it seems as if individual pockets are of excellence, are sort of saying, yeah, let's embrace this. And, you mentioned about the major contract that IBM have won with government to transform and leverage blockchain down there. So it does seem as if there's an embracing of the tech, but it's not all encompassing. I think it's probably the best way of saying it.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. It's definitely, let's embrace it, but let's not talk about it, because if we start talking about it, we'll have to explain to people what the blockchain is, how it's going to be used. So, which is a bit complicated. So, it seems like it's too complicated for the people in Parliament. So, although we have a Friends of Blockchain parliamentary group, so there's definitely debates going on there, but it's just so difficult to find out the real perspective. So you get it when you go to events, networking events, and you hear some things here and there, snippets, but if you set up a meeting, it's still a very low level knowledge base. People still are at that same kind of, what is blockchain, what is it, Bitcoin, is it what's a smart contract, and what do you mean by that? And so it's kind of, I guess it's not gonna go out to the broader public, and I don't think it's a good thing. That's why I guess we started the Canberra Blockchain Center, because I see the need of people understanding what is blockchain and the implications of it. And that's how I got into blockchain, is basically understanding that it can be used for good and bad. So we see internet maybe made popular maybe 30 years ago, and we're still just creating the regulations about privacy now, 30 years on. So with blockchain and privacy, if people don't understand the implications of how it could be used, it's actually quite scary.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, look, I mean, Paul, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, and it's great with the Canberra Blockchain Center that you're trying to bring everybody together within the blockchain, within that ecosystem. Because I think if you've got blockchain-based entrepreneurs working together, they can just bounce off each other, and there'll be mutual contacts that investors and all that type of stuff can all go to the one hub. So it's great that they're sort of focusing on that side. And I know I'm heading down there in a couple of weeks, so I'll definitely we'll be interested in chatting to a couple of the startups.
Sure.
And
they're really keen to meeting you as well. So
okay, all right, awesome. Well, definitely. I mean, when I'm down there, we'll definitely interview a couple of them. I think it's just really, really good stuff. And look, I wish you well with the Canberra Blockchain Center. I know it sometimes can feel like you're pushing proverbial uphill, but I think you're doing a great job there, and it's great to see that you're able to embrace and bring everybody together. So good shout out to you for that. So
thank you.
So Paul, I really appreciate your time, and we'll speak very soon. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Cool. See you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Paul.
You.
That's great.
So there you have it. There seems to be mixed signals coming out of government. On the one hand, here in Australia at least, at a strategic level, an extensive local government report has highlighted blockchain has reached the peak of its hype cycle and should be explored with caution. That said, it appears that at a departmental and even individual level, there is a willingness to drive blockchain activity internally. Not surprisingly, smaller countries like Lithuania, Dubai and Estonia are embracing the opportunities presented by the blockchain. For mid-sized democratic countries, there is the opportunity to learn from their experiences, which includes mistakes, and to lead the world by being a fast follower of these smaller nations. But even this requires firm commitment and direction from the very top of government, and quite frankly, it does not seem to be on the radar as a critical narrative yet. Unfortunately, without this commitment, mid-sized countries could lose a marked opportunity to seize the new opportunities the technology presents. In the next part of this episode, we will continue our review of how the government is viewing the use of blockchain. I will be talking to Katrina Donaghy, co-CEO of Civic Ledger, a blockchain startup that is focusing on blockchain applications within government. We talk with Katrina about her project Water Ledger, which looks at the $16 billion market for water rights here in Australia and how they've worked with different state governments to deal with the current lack of transparency over water trading rights. Water Ledger is gaining traction worldwide, with many international government agencies now looking at Civic Ledger's ideas and models to see how they're being used to solve real-life problems associated with the allocation and trading of water rights. Can governments adopt blockchain technology quickly and effectively? Find out more in the next episode as we continue on our journey down the rabbit hole.